Welcome everyone to our joint IFPMA CIOMS webinar series on clinical research. I'm Sarah Adam, Associate Director in Regulatory Affairs for IFPMA. While more participants are joining our session, allow me to run through some housekeeping items. On the next slide, please. So as you noted, the webinar is held in English, but we are providing interpretation services in French and Portuguese. For this, you can switch between languages using on the Zoom platform the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. The webinar is recorded. Our presentations and the videos in all languages will be made available on the IFPMA website following the event. For this reason, to ensure a good quality of the audio, you have been muted. And if you have any questions for our speakers and panelists during this session, don't hesitate to use the Q&A box that is also on the bottom of your Zoom window. This would be important to raise any questions that you might have. So you might note that some questions might already be raised, but you can vote for the question, so it would increase its visibility and it would be given to the panelists to answer at the end of the session. First, on my next slide, I would like to present you the Mentimeter poll that we would like to actually run today. This is actually a set of 2 questions where we would like to receive your feedback, and this is related to clinical research in Africa. So please go ahead and open the poll. And for this, you have 2 options. Either you can scan the QR code that is appearing on the screen using your mobile phone or tablet, and you see that you have a specific code depending on the language you would like to provide your answer. You can also, as an alternative option, go to the website menti.com and use the specific code that is appearing at the bottom of the QR code. So we encourage all participants and also speakers and panelists to join and provide feedback. And the link will also be appearing in the chat box of the Zoom platform and will remain accessible during the entire webinar. And the first result for this the English poll would be actually presented before we move to the panel discussion. We want to also gather all the results, and this would be provided in our report following the webinar. And now I would like to invite my colleague, Senab Aziz, to take the floor for the opening remarks. Over to you, Senab. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome all our participants as well as our presenters and panelists to our webinar today. I think for many of us, this is our very first webinar for the year. I am Zainab Aziz. I'm an Associate Director at Novartis in the RA Policy and Strategic Operations Sub-Sahara Africa team, and I'm representing IFPMA as a member of the Africa Regulatory Network today. So as an industry association, IFPMA members include 39 multinational pharma companies and leads the work of the Africa Regulatory Network, or ARN. ARN works in partnership with regulatory authorities, the pharmaceutical industry, and other global health stakeholders in Africa to support best regulatory practices that enable patients to have access to good quality medicines, including innovative medicines at continental, regional, and national levels. Today's webinar is hosted by IFPMA in collaboration with CIOMS to bring together experts to discuss the importance of evolving regulatory systems and regulations to support clinical trial conduct, as well as alignment to international regulatory standards. This is the first webinar that is planned, and it is planned in a series of webinars. And this first webinar will be focusing on Africa and address how collaboration between stakeholders in the clinical research community can build on each other's expertise, capabilities, and capacities, and how strengthening clinical research infrastructure can lead to a sustainable ecosystem. We have a very interesting agenda lined up for you today. So we have first up a presentation by Dr. Sam Volazachen from WHO, followed by a presentation by Dr. Lemba Durako from CIOMS. And we will then be having a look at the Mentimeter results, as Sarah mentioned right now. And then we will go into a panel discussion with our diverse panel. We are very honored today to have with us experts from SAPRA, NAFDEC, KVI Institute of Clinical Research in University of Nairobi, IFPMA, DNDI, and AVERIF. And we really look forward to hearing from them on clinical trials in Africa. Clinical trials are a fundamental part of clinical research that supports the development of new medicines or uses of existing medicines. So, good clinical practice and good clinical research requires conducive environment, infrastructure, and capacity to address the health priorities of the communities. And there is a need to promote and advance good quality clinical research in resource limited settings, such as Africa. The responsibility of GCP is shared by all the parties involved: sponsors, investigators, site staff, ethics committees, regulatory authorities, and the research subject. The biopharmaceutical industry is already actively engaged in clinical trials in Africa and has recently published a series of case studies to showcase this. We can provide the link to these case studies in the chat for further information. And IFPMA and its members are fully committed to contribute our experience and knowledge to expand the clinical research infrastructure in Africa. This will in turn drive advancement of healthcare systems. In order to further improve the clinical research landscape in Africa, a multidisciplinary approach and collaboration between regulators, industry, patient groups, and communities are called for. Adoption of international ethical and regulatory standards by all countries would ensure patient safety regardless of the country in which the trial is conducted. Will facilitate the conduct of global and multi-regional trials and enable capacity building and inclusion of more clinical trial sites in low to middle income countries such as those in Africa. Collaborative review pathways and work sharing opportunities would also pave the way for clinical research expansion in Africa. So, with that, I would like to now hand over to Samvel. Just as an introduction, Dr. Samvel Azachan is a pediatrician with a PhD in clinical pharmacology and medical products regulation. He has more than 20 years' experience at WHO in a wide range of leadership roles and is currently leading the regulatory convergence and networks team at the WHO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. Thanks, Samvel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Zainab, for this introduction, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, all dear participants. I would like to start my presentation, and I will be trying to be very short to give more time for the discussions. Please, next slide. With the statement about the importance of medical products in the overall context of public health. As you know, right to health is one of the indispensable human rights, but it is very difficult to imagine how this right could be achieved without access to most important medical products. And today, next one, please. Today, unfortunately, the access to medical products still remains a very important challenge. As of WHO's estimation, about 2 billion people globally have either no access or very limited access to essential medicines. And this situation prevents these people from opportunity to use all the benefits of modern science in medicine and advance in technology. And there are many different reasons for such a dramatic situation, and these reasons include also lack of regulatory capacity in the countries and lack of collaboration and work sharing among national regulatory authorities when they regulate medical products. But also we live currently in the situation of global public health emergency, and we see also a number of terrible military conflicts that are also creating serious problems, not only causing direct losses of lives, but also have a very bad and severe consequences including breakdown of health systems and decreasing also access to medical products. Next one, please. No, previous one. This one, yes. So we also know and we acknowledge the importance of biomedical science and technology in improving access to medical products. But again, we are living in a situation when biomedical science and technology is also advancing in terms of science, from innovative chemistry to molecular drug design and genetics, in medicines, from art to experience and more to evidence, and in technology from manual to automation and computer-controlled operations. And in the same time, complexity of regulatory processes and requirements are dramatically increasing over the past decades. Next one, please. So we know that for any medical products to enter markets in the countries, these products need to be approved by national regulatory authorities. And in this context, WHO World Health Assembly resolutions have been quite vocal in articulating the importance of having strong regulatory capacity. And this is regulatory capacity is an essential component of well-functioning health system. But unfortunately, only less than a third of regulatory authorities in the world are functioning at the global benchmarking tool maturity level 3 or 4. And this also has some reflections or interpretations in form of lack of skilled personnel, lack of appropriate technology, but also more importantly, lack of regulatory guidances and tools, and lack of requirements that are publicly available and transparently used. Next one, please. WHO is, of course, very much concerned with this situation, and we are putting forward some efforts to facilitate good quality national regulatory decisions based on the concept of reliance. And these activities, these efforts also include promoting, first of all, good governance and transparency in medical product sector through good regulatory practices process. We are also promoting and facilitating the processes which would help to build strong national regulatory systems, which could be part of overall health system strengthening. And this is done through global benchmarking process. And we also believe that regulatory systems will be an important contributor to achieving the whole concept of universal health coverage, and will be able to address increasing need and public health priorities. We also understand and mindful that regulatory systems alone, without appropriately trained and skillful workforce, means nothing. And so this is why we also put substantial efforts in developing global competency framework and global regulatory curriculum, which is strongly linked with the global benchmarking tool. But also, most importantly, we are promoting reliance as overall concept, overarching concept through next one. No, please, previous one. Through regulatory cooperation, convergence, and harmonization. We also promote work sharing based on reliance on the work of other better resourced or trusted regulatory authorities to inform national regulatory decision, including in the area of regulation of clinical trials. Next one, please. So this slide demonstrates some critical indicators that are part of WHO Global Benchmarking Tool, and they are related to the regulation of clinical trials, to oversight of clinical trials, to ethical oversight. You can see that these indicators are quite detailed, and the analysis is also available publicly. And to save your time, I would just suggest that you follow the link available in this slide, so you can have more detailed information about these important indicators. Next one, please. Yes, and I mentioned about the WHO good reliance practices or reliance concept. And this is something that WHO was very actively involved since a number of years recently. And very fortunately, a document on WHO good reliance practices has been issued in October 2020 and published in March 2021, and is publicly available now. And this document for the first time has provided the definition of what is reliance. And in the context of this document, according to WHO definition, the reliance is the act whereby the regulatory authority in one jurisdiction takes into account and gives significant weight to the assessments performed by another regulatory authority or trusted institution. And this is helping them in reaching their own regulatory decision. This document also highlights the importance of overall international regulatory cooperation and also making best use of available resources and expertise, which would help to avoid unnecessary duplication and will help to concentrate regulatory efforts and scarce resources where they are most needed. And this concept is also applied throughout the whole product lifecycle and covers all regulatory functions, including regulation of clinical trials. Next one, please. And this slide presents in more details how reliance is applicable in regulation of clinical trials. And already work sharing in the assessment of clinical trials has been actively used in some regions, and we will be having today some examples from Africa, from African Vaccines Regulatory Forum, but also in Europe there is a coordinated assessment in the context of the European Union. And the issue is that by assessing the applications for authorization for clinical trials, national regulatory authorities and ethics committees, they can benefit from the assessment already performed by other participating parties, by other countries, with the view of facilitating and ensuring their own assessment processes. And reliance is indeed the key concept to effective access and oversight for medical products globally, also in case of public health emergencies, and including in the area of regulation of clinical trials. Next one, please. So WHO has put together some sort of a process for optimizing research and development for accelerated access to health products. And this is part of WHO strategy, which are, first of all, the highlights that the access, and I mentioned already in the beginning of my presentation, access to appropriate health products is essential for achieving WHO's mission. And of course, access cannot be achieved also without promoting the research and development for new innovative products and treatments to be created, and facilitating also their introduction in the global community. WHO has developed this optimized process which allows our WHO activities in some important areas to become, first of all, linked and efficient and coherent, with also increased impact on health outcomes. And these activities include research prioritization, health product development advice, which is one of our daily activities, WHO policy guidance development and product assessment activities, and of course, lastly, most importantly, support to implementation in the countries. And the ultimate goal of all these processes is to ensure that development of health products is able to address the increasing and expanding global health needs and helping to accelerate implementation in the countries. Next one, please. This is something that also WHO has been developed. The WHO has developed long time ago, this handbook for implementation of good clinical practice research, GCP. And this, in the context of this handbook, there is also a general definition of human research, which is very much in line with also expectations of WHO, and as described also in our governance rules and procedures. Next one, please. And these are the principles of GCP, which are also highlighted in the manual, which I have presented in the previous slide. And you can see these whole principles, which are of course the same or very similar to GCP guidelines in different jurisdictions, and they are addressing most important elements such as identification of the risk and then applying assessment of risk benefit, and then informed consent, confidentiality, privacy, and many other important things. And Professor Rago will be presenting on CIOMS important developments, which are addressing all of these interesting and critical important areas. Next one, please. We also, of course, put a lot of attention to the regulation of clinical trials with a focus on patient safety in our biennial international conferences of drug regulatory authorities, ICTRA. And the most recent face-to-face meeting, which was in 2018 in Ireland, also put some recommendations to WHO with regards to facilitating exchange of information for clinical trials, and also recommendation to member states on implementing any existing WHO guideline for inclusion of vulnerable populations, children, pregnant women, and women of childbearing age. And this is also critically important and also perfectly highlighted in some recent guidelines issued by CIOMS. Next one, please. And I think this is my last slide instead of conclusion, just to mention that COVID-19 pandemic has generated some sort of clinical trials storm when we had in a very short time, more than 17,000 randomized clinical trials have been initiated all over the world. And unfortunately, but also very predictably, less than 10% of these trials led to the useful evidence generated, and enormous resources were just wasted. And you can imagine how many other lives could have been saved if these resources would have been used properly. But this is the consequence of epidemic. And WHO World Health Assembly Resolution 75.8 in 2022 also recognized this challenge that the well-designed and well-implemented clinical trials are indispensable for assessing the safety and efficacy of health interventions. And the resolution 75.8 also has recommended some important activities. And I would only mention the last one, which is to identify and propose best practices and other measures to strengthen the global clinical trials ecosystem, taking into account relevant initiatives where appropriate. The idea is that we should try to make best use of the resources and to organize the process in such a way that would generate maximum positive impact. And the next one, I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Session, for that great presentation and raising these very important points on clinical trial regulation and as well as reliance in clinical trials. Before we move to our next speaker, for the benefit of any attendees that joined a bit late, I would just like to highlight that we do have a Q&A function open, so please post any questions you may have using the Q&A functionality. And we are also running a poll on Mentimeter. The links to the poll are also available in the chat. So up next, we will have a presentation by Dr. Lambert Racho. Dr. Racho started off his career as a professor of pharmacology and clinical pharmacology at Tartu University in Estonia, and was also a founder of the Estonian Drug Regulatory Authority. Later on, he took on various roles within WHO, where he led work to strengthen regulatory systems, including combating falsified medicines and the development of pharmacovigilance and regulatory networks in low and middle income countries. From April 2016 to date, Dr. Rako holds the position of Secretary General for CIOMS, which is the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences. We're really glad to have you with us today, Dr. Rako. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and let's go to the first slide. So what I'm trying to do today is to give you just a high-level understanding about what is Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences, and then going to some of the concrete working group reports that are relevant to the topic today. And the most recent one, clinical research in resource-limited settings, deserves the most of the attention in my presentation. And then, of course, some little conclusion and next steps. Thank you. Next one, please. Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences was founded in 1949 by WHO and UNESCO. It is in official relations with WHO. It is UNESCO associated partner, and since 2016, it's also ICH observer. And the mission of CIOMS is to advance public health through guidance on health research, including ethics, medical product development, and safety. Next one. CIOMS is a membership organization, and it has international, national, and associate members. And among international members, there are very big international organizations like World Medical Association, which basically joins all the medical doctors all around the world from all the countries. And then there are, of course, more specialized international medical science organizations like International Society of Pharmacovigilance or International Society for Pharmacoepidemiology. From national organizations, there are very important organizations like medical science academies, like Swiss Academy of Medical Sciences, but also the national medical research councils like the South African Medical Research Council or the Indian Council of Medical Research. And then we have a plethora of associate members, and I don't go into depths and details there. Next one, please. Today, CIOMS' major areas of work are in 3 areas. First of all, and the oldest area of work since 1967, is bioethics. Then we have very prominent part of our work is in pharmacovigilance. And then, of course, there is a more vaguely defined area which could be put under the umbrella product development. Next one. So from the recent CIOMS publications, I would point out the 2. First, International Ethical Guidelines for Health-Related Research Involving Humans from 2016, which was prepared in collaboration of WHO. And this objective of this publication has to be to facilitate the implementation of the World Medical Association well-known Declaration of Helsinki. The good side is that this resource document is available in all UN languages, but also beyond, like in Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, and Ukrainian, and some other languages. And also it has online training module on how to navigate the guidelines, freely available from our website. And of course, some of the questions from the audience, I can tell you already the answers are in this book. There was a question about the community engagement. It's a specific guideline in this document 7 and guideline 23, which is about the composition of ethics committees. So there are many other important things, but we can't go into the depths and detail. Now, in 2021, we issued clinical trials in resource-limited settings, which I would like to give you a bit more insight. The objective to this document was to promote ethical, good quality clinical research in resource-limited settings. And there is already in the public domain some synopsis and some reflections. Next one. The report, Clinical Research in Resource-Limited Settings, the development started in 2017 when CIOMS convened an international working group of senior scientists from regulatory authorities, the pharmaceutical industry, public-private partnerships for product development, and academia. And there were 6 in-person working group meetings and 3 virtual meetings, plus a lot of remote work. And that led to the draft that was given to the editorial subgroup in 2022, which was then finalized. And in March 2021, it's very important process, part of the process, the draft document went for the public consultation for 3 weeks. More than 130 comments were received. They were all documented and systematically addressed. And after that, the report was published, the consensus report, in 2021 June. Next one, please. The report is very relevant to this topic of today's seminar because it has an executive summary and recommendations which are high-level recommendations. But I must say that also this document is specific in terms that all the chapters also, and some of the appendixes, have recommendations which go into depth and detail. So the chapters were 5, background and problem statement, the research environment, obstacles and enablers, and today we are talking about the both, and there is a very comprehensive analysis of obstacles and enablers in this report. Then chapter 3, guiding principles for clinical research, ethical considerations, which should be looked in combination with the report I was citing previously, because they are not excluding each other, they are complementary to each other. And then scientific considerations. And of course, there are a number of appendixes which are dedicated to special populations, women and children, digital technologies, and how to use electronic health records in the best way for the clinical research, some outbreak specifics, also some case studies, and then some also modern days clinical research issues like pharmacogenetics and personalized medicine, because also this type of research is ongoing in resource-limited settings. And finally, of course, the working group membership and also commentators list. Next one, please. So the recommendations, which I said are high level and more specific, they are basically grouped to the target audiences. And we identified in this report 3 target audiences for the recommendations: to governments and regulatory authorities, to researchers, and to international organizations and funders. And of course, this will be then presented also across most of the chapters, and there is quite a number of recommendations. So next one. There are some examples. So from the recommendations to the governments and regulatory authorities in chapter 2, for example, when planning to introduce electronic health records, consider lessons learned in other countries and aspire to bring clinical research and information technology experts together to build efficient and transparent systems that can be used for high-quality clinical research. Or from chapter 3, clarify regulatory requirements and harmonize them with those of other countries, identify unnecessary obstacles and reduce bureaucracy, shorten ethics and regulatory review timelines, and rely on the decisions of other authorities wherever possible. Next one. So basically, if you see from the left-hand side, the chapters, and then if you see on the right-hand side, there are subsections of the chapters in green, where you can find quite a number of very specific recommendations, which due to the time limits, we can't go through, but I encourage people to read the report. Next one. Well, this is just an example on how the in-chapter recommendations are presented. And as you can see from this example, they are either to one major stakeholder of the three, or sometimes addressing two major stakeholders, or in some cases also addressing all the three stakeholders. And let's take the final of them. All stakeholders should follow best practices for communication and provide information that is timely, accurate, credible, understandable, and actionable, consistent, and empathic. So there is a lot of very detailed recommendations in this report. And let's go to the next one. So what can I say in conclusions about this report? We could say that more clinical research is needed to fight the diseases affecting people in resource-limited settings. And ethical review systems and regulatory oversight in low and middle-income countries remains fragile. We can also conclude that current GCP guidelines originated in the industrialized countries and are challenging to be implemented meaningfully in resource-limited settings. But this doesn't mean that also aspiring to even where the regulatory requirements don't require following GCP. Even in academic research, there should be aspirations to try to follow GCP as much as possible. And then we should also say that each study is different. So researchers and sponsors have a responsibility to really reflect on ethical and scientific aspects in context before submitting any new clinical research proposal for approval. And of course, even today's environment is increasingly requiring that also the patients should be fully incorporated in the process as appropriate. This report is also a call to action for all the major stakeholders, funders, scientists, the pharmaceutical industry, community representatives, regulators, and governments to collaborate in addressing the proposed recommendations. And finally, the objective would be to create a better ecosystem, as was said by the former speaker. Further clinical research, both regulated and academic clinical research, would deserve a much better ecosystem in many parts of the world. Next one. This new CIOMS report from 2021 has been already discussed in several fora, and CIOMS has tried to increase its outreach because there is a lot of avenues to try to push for the implementation of the aspirations of this report, including many of the recommendations. And also it's very much in line with the directions given by the World Health Assembly Resolution 75/8, strengthening clinical trials. So this all has to be put together and get the direction of better implementation of many of the good principles and aspirations in the CIOMS reports and also in other relevant regulatory documents and other organizations' guidance documents to facilitate and build better ecosystems for clinical research. Next. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lambert, for that interesting presentation and for giving us an overview of the CIOMS recommendations. This is a very useful report, and I would really encourage all to have a look at this report again. So we will now have a look at the Mentimeter results. Thank you all for taking the poll. Let me have a look. I think the results are going to come up shortly. Yes, so the question on have you or your organization conducted clinical trials in Africa? And we can see that we've got the majority of responses. 55 respondents have said yes. We've got 31 that have said no, and 32 now, and 13 that have said it's not applicable, probably not applicable to their role or function. So thank you so much. I see the numbers are growing and now 67 for yes. So that's very encouraging. Thank you so much for your responses. Moving to the next question. Which regulatory challenges have you been facing when conducting clinical trials? Please select a maximum of 3. So I won't go through each of these challenges, but this is really for us to know, what the challenges are and to help also our training purposes for the next webinar that's planned, so we can maybe tackle some of these challenges and discuss further on these challenges. So with that, I'd like to now hand over to Lembit once again to start off our panel discussion. Thank you so much, Lembit.
Thank you. And let's have a next slide about our panelists. We have now the time to go to the panel discussion. And before going to the panel discussion, it's a great pleasure and honor to have a very quick high-level introduction of the panelists that we have here. And excuse me in advance if I do some mistakes in pronouncing the panelists' names. So it's a great honor and pleasure to greet Dr. Boitumelo Semete Makokotlela from the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. It's equal pleasure to welcome Dr. Walter Yaoko from the Kavi Institute of Clinical Research from University of Nairobi, Dr. Benoniam Yakubu, Deputy Director, Head of Clinical Trial Division, NAFDAC, Nigeria, also Chair of RF Technical Committee, Ms. Imene Ben Abdallah, Country Manager, Libya and Tunisia for Roche, and then Dr. Diade Maiga, Regional Vaccine Regulation Office, WHO Regional Office for Africa. And last, but of course not least, Dr. Fabienne Benoit, Head of Regulatory Affairs in DNDi. So we start the panel discussion with questions to the panelists, and my first question will be to the key, because that would be the clinical investigators in Africa. They are the very important part of the equation. And I have the question to our only investigator in the panel. What is your biggest regulatory challenge or struggle? What are the regulatory barriers and real-life problems you have met? So, Walter, please, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, thank you, Lambert. And thank you for the opportunity for being in this panel. I think to timelines. The time that it takes to get regulatory and ethics approval. Personally, I think talking to other researchers as well, that would be considered to be one of the largest problems that we face as researchers. Of high regulatory review timelines actually was scored the highest by most people. So if we can be able to shorten the timelines for which protocol review process goes through both ethics and regulatory, that would serve a major step, a major milestone in encouraging and promoting clinical research in Africa. The natural question would be, what are my thoughts on how this can be done? I think if you look at many standard operating procedures for regulatory approvals in the continent, and I've had a look at a few, they do not have timelines. And I think for me, if there can be a commitment by the regulatory authorities to be able to say that if you submit your protocol for review, you should be able to get a feedback within a particular timeline. And the regulatory authorities then stick to that timeline. I know that that is linked also to the issues of capacity in terms of the number of people who would be able to give their time to review the protocols for the regulatory authorities to meet those timelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's move and get reflections from the IFPMA representative. Tell us about your experience in conducting clinical trials in Africa. Can you explain the regulatory challenges that you have faced?
Thanks a lot. I'm really happy to be here with all of you discussing about clinical research in Africa. IFPMA, I will build on the introduction of Zainab, and I think that we are committed and highly engaged to conduct clinical trials in the continent. A lot of efforts have been done, and our commitment also is to stick to the highest standard of regulation and ethics when conducting those clinical trials. I'm happy that we are sharing a lot of areas for a solution, but also from challenges perspective. I will share a little bit of the experience of Roche. We have an experience of 25 years of conduction of clinical trials in Africa. During the last 5 years, we have been successful in really making a big progress in terms of sites opening, and we have conducted we moved from 60 to 140 sites. We also have been able to allocate 45 new studies in the continent, and with enrollment of more than 450 patients. We are really happy to have those numbers, but we think that we can do even better if we remove some of the hurdles that we have. Talking about the hurdles, and I do share the same that have been shared with Dr. Walter, timelines. And when we talk about timelines for approval, but also timelines for submission, as we don't have harmonized local requirement, this requires from us a lot of customization, and it takes a lot of time for submission. Before even to start the study, we also face the challenge of lack of data to be able to include new countries. Don't having enough data around the burden of the disease, the number of patients, and so on is really limiting for us. You have already touched on that during your presentation, WHO and CIOMS. The lack of standardization is really something that we can work on. We also have the challenge of submission in papers, and lack of digitalization is something that is also making the timelines really lengthy. Last but not least, I would also mention the sustainable access to medicine beyond clinical trials. What happens when the clinical trials ends to the patients that have been enrolled, but also to the larger population. So this is from my side.
Thank you so much, and let's move on. I think the next I would like to have a question to the NDI representative. So it's again the same, you know, basically, what are the regulatory challenges that you are facing?
Yes, thanks a lot, Lambit. Good morning, evening, afternoon to all. Yeah, it's the same question, but I would say it's maybe more challenge. So maybe just to set the scene, at the NDI, so Drug for Neglected Disease Initiative, the objective is to discover, develop, and accelerate access to treatment for neglected patients. And we focus on neglected tropical medicine and viral disease. And this is happening in resource-constrained setting. I think as a reminder, 40% of global NTD burden is in Africa. So the NDI is working with public, private, or not-for-profit partners. And as of today, the NDI has conducted about 30 studies in Africa within 18 years, and with a majority of phase 2-3 in the 15 sub-Saharan Africa countries. So as you can see, that the NDI is really focusing on constraint setting countries and NTD. So I group 4 main challenges that we met. I will not repeat what has already been said. I will just focus on these 4. The first one I will say is that we are conducting study for neglected tropical medicine. So we always say that there is no guideline, but for NTD, there is no guideline at all. This is an issue, and no reference. We run a study without any reference and no guideline. We know that there is a growing number of clinical trials in Africa, but this is not necessarily the case in the place where the patients are focused for the NDI. Studies for NTD are conducted in countries with really few experience, which bring even more challenge, because there is for them really a few opportunities to perform and conduct studies for these neglected disease, which are of interest in this country only. The second group is there is a really little experience in new clinical entity. And again, we are trying to develop new drug for this population. We know that pre-registration studies need extensive and detailed documentation. Post-registration study or other study will require less. So there is really a risk for filing a dossier for the product registration. All data are important, no document should miss. And also, as highlighted by Samuel, there is a more and more complexity in the regulatory process and requirement, which really increase the difficulties to assess the clinical trial. Third one is the reliance is not always possible. In a lot of cases, we are running study in only one country. So reliance to other country may not be possible. Reliance to other continent might not be possible. Reliance to assessment from a high-income country might not be feasible. As an example, on 30 studies that were run in Africa, 18 were done in only one country. So the reliance, we do believe in South-South collaboration, in reliance process, but in our case might not be always feasible. We have used regional procedure. We are advocates for that as soon as it's possible for multi-country studies. The last one, quickly, is we also face a challenge in implementing international standards in remote area where the studies are done. The ICH guidelines are not easy to implement. We could give a lot of examples. Also, the inspection very often is done on the book with critical finding, but may not be considered as critical finding because of misunderstanding of the regulation or lack of experience. Or also, I think is very important, is that the challenge of these guidelines are not necessarily fitting with the local requirements. This is the 4 groups of challenges we are facing, in particular at the NDI. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, the NDI is working often indeed in particularly difficult situations in many ways. So it's really tough because some of the diseases are in the areas of the countries where it's really the conditions are very, very difficult. So thank you for this valuable input. And now let's go to the regulators. And first, I would like to have a question to the representative of NAFDAC. Benno, are you there? Hello? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So I would like to have a question for you, which would be, what are you doing in NAFDAC to streamline the regulatory procedures to facilitate clinical trial applications and performance. So what are your recent aspirations in this area?
Oh, thank you very much. I think recently, in the past few years, we've discovered that we've been having a lot of clinical trial application coming to our country. And in response to that, I think our management has really done a lot to make sure it gets the agency ready to receive as many applications as possible. And NAFDAC has, from the beginning of AVAREV, has been a member of AVAREV right from its inception. And again, through AVAREV, a lot of guidance documents have been put in place to guide potential sponsors that want to do clinical trials in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. So in line with that, we have all our guidelines hosted on our website. It's a form of informing potential sponsors that we are ready for clinical trials in Nigeria. And apart from that, in the past 2 years, NAFDAC has developed an electronic clinical trial applications portal that makes it easier for sponsors to put in the application from any part of the globe. Again, it makes it easier for sponsors to look at our guidelines from our website, go in there, put your applications based on the regulatory guidelines you have on the website. And again, that really helps us because we already have timelines. Unfortunately, I could have somebody say that maybe some African countries don't have timelines for approval of clinical trials. Again, I want to emphasize here that AVAREV platform serve as a good avenue for collaboration as well as for reliance. So in AVAREV, we have had a timelines of 60 work days for clinical trial application to approval. And again, many of us have been trying to see how we can keep to that timelines. I'm not saying that there are no challenges in some African countries, but again, that is the stipulated timelines. And coming down to challenges we had recently when we had COVID, again, with the 60-day timelines, we realized that based on the emergency situation of COVID, we have to cut down the timelines for review to 21 work days. Again, that was quite good for us. And knowing the fact that we have limitation of expertise in the sub-region generally, so we need to be factual in the timelines we set for us to be able to meet up with those applications.
Thank you so much. Now let's move to the another regulator, and it's the South African regulator, the representative from SAPRA. Please tell us what changes were implemented to strengthen the regulatory clinical trial framework in South Africa recently.
Thank you very much, and good day, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to engage on quite an important discussion and very relevant as we are, coming out of COVID, and as regulators really taking this opportunity to say what we did in COVID, how do we learn from that experience, in addressing some of the challenges that you've already alluded to, but also some of the points that Benoit made reference to. From a SAPRA perspective, I'd like to just reflect on 3 things that we did differently that we want to ensure that we implement going forward. The first important one was having a pre-submission meeting with the applicant. We found that this helps a lot because then, we can talk to some of the study design elements, the endpoints, that the applicant, the PIs are looking at, and whether it is adequately addressed in the design. We would also talk to some of the matters pertaining to GCP, etc. So we found that having this pre-submission meeting and that when we back and forth and some of the sponsors were raising the concerns around timeframes. And we found that this mechanism does assist a lot in reducing the timeframes post-submission. The second element was working closely with the ethics committees. Typically as regulators, in our case, for example, we would make a decision and then we say it will be pending an ethics outcome. And what we found is that when we engage with ethics committees, particularly on those either new therapeutic products or new designs, wherein there's still a lot of uncertainty, when we then align, it makes both our processes a lot more seamless. And then the third element was really, and not necessarily for COVID with this third one, but it's something that we want to do a lot more. And I'm sure Diadra will speak to this, is ensuring that we participate a lot stronger in EVEREF. And I would also like to encourage the sponsors to utilize that mechanism, because we do have the technical know-how, very well structured program. And we spoke about digitization, we spoke about the informativeness of the trials, and I'm sure we'll speak about some of the mechanisms that are being considered within that. So I do find that if particularly wherein it's a multi-country study, utilizing EVEREF as a mechanism to submit the clinical trial is quite important. And then lastly, I just want to talk to digitization, and this is implemented, but SAPRA will also be implementing quite soon, is digitizing the application process. And not only to make the submission process seamless and easier, other element that we will be including onto this digital platform in the future, in our very early discussions, is around this matter of the informativeness of the trials. I think it was mentioned earlier that a number of trials are conducted, and how do we ensure that the data generated from there is indeed useful to enable regulatory decisions? Thank you. I'll pause here.
Thank you so much. And I think you pointed out several new and important points. So let's go to the next panelist. It's representing AWAREF. Please, can we ask one question also to you, and you would answer from the AWAREF perspective. What are the needed measures to make collaborative clinical trial applications more efficient and attractive to stakeholders? So what's your vision on that?
Well, thank you very much, Lembi, for this excellent question. I think based on the experience of the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, which is the network of all national regulatory authorities in Africa, together with the ethics committees, which is established since 2006 by WHO. I think there are certain measures which really have been very helpful. The first one is when you engage in a collaborative clinical trial application or joint assessment or joint exercises, the first thing is to clarify the criteria, the rules, the different roles and responsibility, which can be part of a guideline. So I think adopting a guideline will be one of the measures, as well as standardizing tools for the collaborative or joint review. That guidelines will provide clarity on many things, including the criteria for the review, as well as the process steps, the roles and responsibilities of all stakeholders, because you are bringing together regulators, ethics committees, the applicants, sponsor, and PIs. So you need to clarify all of that, as well as the role of maybe WHO as a neutral umbrella. And also for the applicants, sponsors, and PIs, certain measures will also be important, like, for example, to have harmonized submission requirement and predictable timelines, because as you can see, many of the colleagues who just talked now, I think the top challenge they talk about is the timeline. So it seems that there is still challenges with regard to timeline, although there is a huge progress which has been made by African countries in terms of really review and approval timeline for clinical trial applications. So so having harmonized submission requirement will help for that, and also to have also a neutral umbrella which will facilitate the process. So this is what WHO, as well as the regional economic communities, as you know, in Africa we have many regional economic communities like East African Community, West Africa, SADC, IGAD, ICAS. So this is what they play as neutral umbrella in convening collaborative assessment meetings and providing support. So which also include to provide external experts as additional resources to ensure the robustness and the quality of the assessment. So I think one thing I will say to finish my my speech here is that I think I am seeing a need for regulators and the applicant to speak to each other, to listen to each other, because with the experience we have now, regulators are complaining that the submission requirements are not met. There are a lot of issues with the submissions, with the timeline for submission of amendments when they raise questions. So they think that maybe sometimes the applicant delays. At the same time, the applicant are also complaining about the regulator and the ethics committee. So I think there is a need to accept to talk to each other, or to make sure that each other is understand the process very well. So that's what I understood as one of the big challenges, despite really the big progress which have been made, because with our report now, almost I will say at least the majority of the countries of regulators and even ethics committees were really making a lot of progress in terms of having a transparent system in place, having the guidelines which clarify the application requirement, all of that, but still there are problems. So that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, as we are starting to run out of time, so the next round of questions, I would ask the panelists to be extremely short, 1 minute answer only. So first to the key player investigator, what would be the changes that you would like to see in the regulatory framework that would make the things more smooth? Let's say 1, 2, 3. What are your best guess that would make the things better, please?
Yeah, thank you again. I've alluded to one of those is if the researchers can be able to know for certainty that their protocols would be reviewed within a particular timeline. So if the regulators say it takes us 4 weeks to review the protocol, they should not be following the regulator repeatedly to get that response because they have a commitment. So having something like a researcher's charter that is given to researchers so that they know and the regulators commit to meet the timelines, I think that would really be a major boost. Thank you.
Thank you. So predictability. Thank you. So then we'll go to the IFPMA. Based on your experience, what you would propose as solutions to overcome the barriers? Any short, concise answers to that, please?
Okay, it's hard to keep short, but I will try. Harmonization, I think it's common to all. Harmonization of procedures and how can we learn from each other, collaborative work and reliance. This will be for sure help all of us. I think the African Medicine Agency can play a key role in that as well, with the support, of course, of all partners. creation of platforms that enable the discussion and dialogues. I believe that with the public-private partnership, this will help like fostering and evolving the clinical research like quickly and learning from each other, because I think these kind of forums, we are hearing a lot of great experience from South Africa, from Nigeria, but also we can learn from each other. I think that we need to duplicate those opportunities.
Thank you. So the NDI now, what would be the proposed solutions to overcome the barriers you mentioned? Because previous you talked about the barriers, but what would be the solutions, please?
So we have a lot of solutions, but in 1 minute, I will focus on 3. First, learning from each other. Fully agree with you, Imen. And especially because at the end, we have a lot of experience in remote areas, so I think we can share and also learn from the others. The first one for me, it's really, I'm happy that CMT address it. It's really to meet with health authority, scientific advice, pre-submission meeting, and maybe we could link the meeting and have joint meeting with regulatory and ethics committee, because there is too often duplication of requirements, also to address the import license that lasts forever before the study can start. So there is a lot of things that can be addressed in a face-to-face, the protocol itself, the study itself, the process as well, in collaboration or not with a partner like or WHO. And the last one, quickly, I think there is really a need to have regulation adapt to remote area. And I'm very happy that there is the ICH E6 R2 that allow this guideline encourage the implementation in a risk-based approach. And I do believe that we can go even more in details and more in the remote. And here I think we can also address and provide some good argument and some good example to improve this regulation that could fit with local requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, the ICH E6 has been now recently going through the major, so to say, revision, and hopefully some of these revision principles will make certain research more pragmatically possible, because in ICH E6 there has been a bit more inspectors' views sometimes than other types of views. But okay, so let's go now to the next, and it's again to the NAFTAC representative. What are you doing to collaborate with ethics committees, and are you also offering some support to the ethics committees? So you are mute, Penno, please.
Sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think like Dedis mentioned earlier, the goal of our is to bring ethics committee and regulators together. And again, most of the times, NAFDAC and ethics started through AWRF, and we came back home to consolidate that relationship. In fact, to a point, we had to sign an MOU with the ethics committee to make sure that anything we're doing, we should be able to share information. On several occasions, we've organized joint review with them, and it has been successful. We've organized joint trainings, and to be able to bring in researchers to let them know our processes together. Again, at the moment, we're even planning one. So, and that really has brought us closer. So if there are issues, we shared information among ourselves. So that really brought us together. And remember, we have many IRBs in Nigeria, but we have an umbrella body called the National Ethics Committee, which like a supervisory body for the IRBs across the country. So any policy that we want to put in place and we want the ethics committee to know, so the National Ethics Committee can be able to, will always dispense this to the IRBs. So I think that has really helped us to work closely with each other. And we're looking forward to improve that relationship.
Thank you. And I'm now rushing to the next. I have a question to the Sapra from South Africa, and I'm putting it now. What was a question and also elaboration in Dr. Samuel Azatian's presentation from WHO, talking about reliance in regulating clinical trials. So how you are in South African Regulatory Authority, how you are looking on the reliance in the regulating clinical trials, and are you using some elements of reliance in your everyday practice, please? Yeah, Sapra, South Africa. I think there was something happening with the.
Got disconnected. This is to me. I missed it when you were asking a question.
Okay. So can I ask it again?
Yes, please.
Yes. Well, as you remember, Dr. Samuel Azatian referred to the reliance in his presentation, and I just wonder, are you using some elements of reliance in your everyday practice when dealing with regulating clinical trials in South Africa?
Not particularly for clinical trials, because you know, at this point, it's still an investigational product, and then depending on which phase of the clinical trial is under review, we may not have adequate data. So not particularly reliance, but certainly, you know, through AVRF and through accessing data from elsewhere, I would say more collaborative review practices. So that's more, yeah, let me pause there.
Thank you. Thank you. And last very quick question to the AVRF. What is, in your perspectives, what needs to be done to make AVRF even more efficient than it's today?
Okay, no, thank you very much. I think, so what we are trying to do is, we for example, we have an initiative which we call clinical trial process optimization. So which is to see how the countries in the African region, they can really optimize their processes and to remove all inefficiencies, anything which can delay the review and approval process, anything which can make the system inefficient, to try to remove them, and also to identify areas where they need support, like capacity building, all of that. So we started this process, and we already did that assessment for process optimization in Ghana, in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Kenya, and in Nigeria, in 5 countries. So this is an effort which will help guide also other countries, but also we want to support countries to reach maturity level 3 for clinical trial oversight function, which because that taking in consideration the global benchmarking tool, so which is address all kind of elements which are important, like you talk about reliance, for example, right now, whereas some sub-indicators related to reliance, so we need to have this in place. And also we want to make sure that the commitment of countries will increase. And for that one, we developed and it has been adopted, a memorandum of understanding by countries, regulatory authority and ethics committees. So these MOUs have been already signed by a few countries, but we are going to work to have more countries to sign these MOUs to make sure that what has been agreed upon in the continent in terms of timelines, processes to follow, to avoid deviating from the processes when you participate in joint review, all of that, so that can be implemented properly and to have more predictability. And also, finally, we also need to, I think, to work to have a certain sense of urgency at the regulatory authorities level. So we need to support the national authorities for them to be able to deliver the decision in emergency procedures. So these are, I think, a few things which we will continue to work on, and we hope that it will improve the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all the panelists for the valuable contributions. And now I would hand over back to my co-moderator to try to do almost impossible to try to get some questions and answers. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Lambert, and thank you to all our panelists for that very interesting discussion and for sharing your perspectives. I would also like to thank the participants and our audience for the great questions, for your engagement. Unfortunately, as Lambert so rightly put, it seems like we are running out of time, and we will have to do our best with taking the questions that we are allowed to, time permitting. So I will get right into it. The first question we've received is, what we also noticed is lack of collaboration between national regulatory agencies and national ethics committees. Have you in your experiences a way to put them to work together? So I think maybe if I can take this question and pose it to Samvel.
Yes, I think Jaje has already quite perfectly addressed this question in his presentation regarding AVREF, which is a great example of how national regulatory authorities and ethics committees, also Benno in his presentation addressed the same issue. I think we have already good examples of how this issue is addressed in Africa, and this good example should be extrapolated also in other regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samvel. And then I think we've got, I'm just trying to pick out the questions that have already not been answered. There has been a few that's been answered directly. What's the opinion of the WHO regarding inspection of studies managed in Africa? What are the criteria to decide or not to go? Does the WHO work with other HAs, like, for example, IFPMA? I think you also did cover a bit of this, Samvel. I don't know if you can elaborate a little more.
I think this is for Jaje to elaborate, as he's really representing the continent in this context.
Yes, yes, indeed. We supported member states to develop a good clinical practice GCP inspection guidelines, so which has been adopted by many countries in the African continent, and that guideline has been even converted into an online training, which is available on OpenWHO. So it provides some guidance to countries on the objectives of any inspection they need to do, because they can decide to have inspection based on the risk they can feel with regard to any clinical trial application, and also based on the capacity in terms of the human resources they have, because they also have responsibility to do a lot of other activities, and in general in the regulatory, they have limited staff dedicated to this work. So they will need to prioritize and to see on this basis, see how they can plan for inspection, and also to have joint inspection by the regulatory authority and the ethics committee. That's also a provision which is also available for countries.
Thank you very much for those responses. Moving on to the next question. From the perspective of pharmaceutical industry, the regional and especially global regulatory environment encompassing pharmacovigilance safety reporting is challenging due to the amount of different reports that have to be produced and also in relatively short timelines. Is standardization and uniformization of regulatory requirements concerning safety reporting in clinical trials in different countries in Africa something you think all stakeholders could benefit from? Patients, but also regulatory authorities as well as the industry? Are there any plans or initiatives in this regard? So maybe I'll pose this question to me from South Africa and then to NAFDAC. Tumi, do you want to start? It's PV related and standardization of PV guidelines.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, I mean, this is an important element, an element that all of us as regulators really are looking at, particularly, for those, again, who are ML3, this is an important element to look at PV during the actual clinical trial. It will also be important because then it informs, the clinical data when the dossier is eventually submitted and the risk management plan. So this is something that we are looking to build into our PV platforms that we use post-registration and utilize that for clinical. It hasn't happened yet, but it's certainly something that we are discussing. Just to also mention that we do have the AU3S project involving 5 of us African countries, and we're collecting data and sharing data. So that even utilizing the same platform for that type of engagement.
Thank you so much, Tumi. Benno, I don't know if you'd like to also take a stab at that question, please.
Yes, absolutely. I think reporting safety signal during clinical trial is very key. And again, I want to refer to what Abarab just did recently. We had to develop a new guidelines, hoping that in the future, all countries will adopt it. And I think that will really help us to have a unified system whereby if you are running a multi-center clinical trials, if you are submitting your safety signals during clinical trials, you can as well use that platform to submit to each country at the same time. So at the moment, ABREF just launched that document. Hopefully that countries will adopt this document for use. And again, talking about the issue of 3S system, AU3S platform, Nigeria is part of it already. So, and I think with that, we are looking forward to see how we can have a unified system of collecting pharmacovigilance information during clinical trials. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benno. So just in terms of time, I'm going to have to stop with the Q&A discussion at this point. Thank you all so much for your questions and for your engagement. As we mentioned at the beginning, this is the first in a series of webinars, and we will look at these questions and try to incorporate it maybe in a subsequent webinar. I'll now hand over to Lembit for closing remarks.
Thank
you all.
Thank you, and thank you everybody, the panelists, the speakers, and also participants. I think it has been a great experience, and as it's a start of the series, we can learn from what we'll learn from you today in making some adjustments how we go on forward, and maybe have some more specialized webinars designed to address some more specific issues. So I would like to finish it that as all stakeholders are in public health, there is one little problem. No matter how good you are, you always can be better tomorrow. So let's take it with us and look on critically what we could do better tomorrow, because the tomorrow is all what we live in the future, and try to fix the things that we couldn't fix today. So there is a lot to do, a lot of agendas ahead of us, and let's commit ourselves for marching and doing the things better tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.